Hey, good morning, all. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. It's already December 14th. I always say it already. Every date, Ani, I say already. It doesn't seem to matter. Common Good Podcast coming to you today. We're going to be talking about what's happening in Malaysia, how it references what's happening in the United States, and around Christian nationalism and the call of how Christians should engage with their government. And so this is a great little window that came out in an article that we saw a few weeks ago. And I said, well, if you're going to talk about any of this, you have to talk with Ani Zonneveld from Muslims for Progressive Values. Hi, Ani.
Hi. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Now, Ani, we like starting with the weather. I'm in Minneapolis. I look up there out the window, and it's hazy and cloudy and cold and raining and snowing at the same time. How are things there in beautiful Southern California?
Well, it is beautifully clear. However, it is cold. It's 30 degrees.
Seriously?
Yes, it's cold. Yes. It's been snowing in the mountains. I think about 4 or 5 feet of snow that they had over the weekend, and there's going to be more snow this weekend. So,
My goodness. Well,
come skiing in California, folks.
There have been so many times I have been in Southern California, not wherever when it's been 30, but there's days where it's just downright chilly. And I'm like, those Beach Boys, they lied to me as a kid. I just can't quite get over it. In my mind, it was always sunny and 72.
Yeah. It's the songs and the movies, yeah. And all we do in Los Angeles is we lay around the pool.
That's right.
I have to tell you a story, okay? So there's a friend from the Middle East, and I'm always working, right? And he says to me, Ani, you work all the time. Aren't you supposed to be sitting around around the pool all day? And I'm like, where'd you get that idea from? From the movies.
Yes, 90210. No, totally.
Right?
Yeah, that's the attitude. And kind of that laid back, like maybe you'll take a skateboard over to the co-op and pick up a juice and then just come back to the pool and, it's vacation. That's one of the things, though, honestly, about living in a place where other people vacation is that people get in their minds that like, oh, I've been to LA. It's really great. Everybody just kind of hangs out. Like, no, they're hanging out with you because you're there on vacation. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Most of the time they're doing things. Well, Ani, remind people what you do at Muslims for Progressive Values, those who have yet to know all the goodness.
Yeah. So Muslims for Progressive Values was founded in 2007, and it is a human rights organization. We advocate for women, LGBT rights, as well as for the separation of religion and state, for the right to believe or not in the context of Islam. And so we work in that intersection of faith and human rights, and we use religious language to affirm human rights, and that's what makes us different.
A lot of people don't know that this kind of work has to be done, that there's advocating that needs to happen at the governmental level in all countries in the relationship of religion to the government. Can you talk about that a bit? Just what, how important that is?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, the problem with Muslim states, Muslim majority countries, is that they use religion to justify their policies. They use religion to justify homophobic laws, laws against women, child forced marriages, and so they use Sharia law, right? Their interpretation of the Quran. And that's the problem. And so we, as a Muslim organization, advocate the rights for LGBT, the rights for women, women's rights, etc., in countering it using religion. And so that's what makes our work actually dangerous to them, because we use religion against their policies. And so a lot of times, for a long time, Muslim majority countries have been getting away with justifying their human rights abuses in the name of religion. They do so at the United Nations, as well as within their country. And so when we come in, we file reports against them at the United Nations, undermining their justifications. It really pulls the rug from underneath them. And that is also makes our work dangerous to them, because it shows the spotlight of their falsehood. right? Yeah. So I can get into the weeds with examples, but
Yeah.
I have actually a sort of a notorious reputation with the Malaysian government. There was one time, and I can talk about this now, or I can talk about it later. But you let me know. But I've
Yeah,
been
yeah.
on
Why don't you
there.
hang on, and we'll use that. We'll
Yeah.
talk about that when we get into this article. What I think is interesting for a lot of people to think about is they often hear about religious leaders in the United States and people in our government using
Mm,
Christianity to try to warn people and demonize and um, scare people about Muslims under the banner that if Muslim population grows in the United States, then they're going to take over our government and they're going to put in Sharia law in the United States. That's talked about in the right wing spaces
mm,
rather frequently. And a lot of people are, especially in the religion circles, the worlds that I'm in, are having to say all the time, like, you should don't, that's not what happens. But in some places, that is what happens, right? And I'm not saying it's going to happen in the United States, but that's the context. And curiously, then, in the United States, it's often the people who want Christianity to be the government's preferenced religion who are threatened that they think that if you have too many Muslim voters, then you're going to have Islam be the preferred religion. So they're not saying these critiques in the United States of Muslim influence. They're not saying we don't want to have religion and our government be wedded together. They're saying we want it wedded together and we want it to be Christian and
yeah.
not Muslim
Yeah.
expressions of it. So
Yeah.
it's really it's a complicated I don't know,
Yeah.
it's a complicated set of circumstances, isn't it?
So yeah, and I think well, in the context of the United States, it's easy to use religion, and we've seen that happen. We've seen that transition for many, many years already, and how some of the states have used their interpretation of Christianity to legislate, right? Like
Hmm.
in Alabama and Texas. So, if anything, and I've been writing about this for some years now, I call it the Christian Sharia law, so which really offends them. But basically, that's what they've been doing.
Yeah.
So, let me get some numbers out here. So, Muslims probably make out about 5 to 6% of the American population. So we're a very small, population, number one. Number two, the majority of Muslims actually don't attend mosque. The
Mm.
majority of Muslims are actually progressive. 72% of American Muslims say that they identify themselves as Muslim, but they don't attend mosque. They find their spiritual fulfillment outside the mosque.
Mhm.
69% of American Muslims say the same thing.
Mm.
And 52% of American Muslims um, indicated that Islam should be interpreted for the 21st century and in the context of the society
Yeah.
that we live in. And so,
Wow.
I don't think anyone should fear that Sharia law is going to take over America at all. If anything, there's a lot of Muslims like myself. We would fight tooth and nail against that happening. So,
Mhm. Yeah, right, right.
so the law of the land is the Constitution. Let's put that to rest, America.
Yeah, yeah, but there's this Christian nationalist movement in the United States that wants the Constitution to be subservient to Christian teaching. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a that's one of
yeah,
the things we spend a lot of time talking about, and we know is alive and well in the world. And so, this conversation about the role of religion and our governments, it's not only a question that we have here in the United States. It's one that's going on all over the world,
mhm,
and is really important. Which is why this article that I saw a couple of weeks ago was really intriguing to me. The reason I saw it was that I have one of those Google search alerts
mhm,
set up for a bunch of words around the work that we do, right? So like vote common good and common good. So I get these little, news roundups that'll say on the internet, here's where the word common good or vote common
mhm.
good has been used.
Yep.
And this article pops up about how Christians in Malaysia, some of the Christians won an election, and the opponents to this Christian group were saying that the Christians wanting to Christianize Malaysia. So if you vote for them, you're voting for the overturning of Islam in Malaysia. Very similar to, sort of the mirror image to what people talk about in the United States. And what really struck me was the opening paragraph of this, where the Christian people in this political group say that in Malaysia, Christians are committed to the common good in this country and have no plans to proselytize and Christianize the nation. Well, the reason that struck me is that's our motto around Vote Common Good, right? Is for Christians to care about the common good and not try to Christianize through the government or the government itself. So it was curious to me that. So anyway, that's what struck me, is that they're and you can see right there in the headline, vote common good is what shows up. So this conversation is happening in Malaysia, and then that caused me to want to, of course, to talk with you about what's happening there. And so if I read the story right, what was going on was the former prime minister was a person stirring up this anti-Christian bias in Malaysia. And it's just the mirror image of our former president stirring up anti-Islamic narratives in the United States. And the answer in both places was the pursuit of common good as the thing that's going to be the protection. So it was just, I don't know, it was a head spinning sort of article for me.
So the difference between Malaysia and America, you have highlighted the similarity. The difference is that in Malaysia, that sort of speech is incitement to hate, and it is illegal. You actually get thrown in jail for inciting hate or inciting, using religion and race, because we've had a history of race riots in May of 1969. And so after that, the government really instituted a really strict censorship on language when it comes to incitement of distrust between races and between the religions in Malaysia. And so that's the context from which we come from. And so when that ex-prime minister made that speech, there were actually several individuals and organizations that filed a police report.
Wow.
So imagine that happening in the United States. It would never happen, because we have no censorship of speech here in the United States, sadly. Even though I am an advocate for freedom of speech, but then this freedom of speech has been so abused in the United States to the detriment of the benefit of the society. So that's the problem that we have right now. And so that's the one context. And then the other context too is that some years ago, there was a case where the Malaysian government at that time sued a church for using the word Allah in the translation of the Bible into Malay. And so that's why this proselytization is an issue, because that's the historical context. Okay. And so, and then what happened was, so it went to court, and it went to the secular Supreme Court of Malaysia, and the court decided that no, the Christian organization was allowed to use the word Allah in translation of the Bible into Malay. And because the Malaysian government was arguing, no, this Allah is a Muslim God, so and is Malay, and so therefore it's Muslim. It's just this equation of race to religion, which is so problematic.
Yes. Wow.
And so, but they lost the case. And the thing is, just for everyone listening here, is the word Allah means the God, okay? And the word the God is an Arabic word. And so, and the first, monotheism is Christianity. I mean, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So Christians have, if anything, the Christians have the right to use the word Allah over Muslims, okay?
Yeah, well,
and the Christians in Palestine still use it, right? So in Jerusalem, still use it. So give me a break. So the government lost that case, and the Christians were allowed to use the word Allah. And so this is the context of the proselytization, because there is a history of that.
Wow, that so it is it's a fascinating subtext for us in the United States, I think, to hear that in other countries, in the last 50 years, there's been a history of racial tension, race riots, racial bigotry, religion merging itself with government authorities, using government power to give benefit to some religion and to oppress others. For a lot of people, they feel that feels like an American context, an American story. A lot of Americans know that story well and are less familiar with the other stories. And when you're in the United States context, obviously you live here in the
Yeah.
U.S. citizen and all, and you're bilingual in seeing this context play out. What do you think we need to know in our United States context that we could learn from countries like Malaysia and other places in the world that are learning how to navigate these issues?
I think it's really imperative that Americans really wake up to the transition of how America's become a theocracy in many ways,
Mm.
and this is really frightening. And when it comes to abortion rights, when it comes to so many policy issues right now, and government, the impetus from which these legislations are being drafted and
Yeah.
proposed, they are really coming from a particular interpretation of Christianity. And so when that's being legislated, then we are a theocracy. And to a degree, we already are. It's just that fortunately, there's still a lot of organizations and faith-based and progressive faith-based organizations in particular who are arguing in the name of religion against this shift to theocracy of the
Yeah.
United States. And so abortion rights is a perfect example. So when you have a Jewish a woman and a synagogue, actually now there's a case in Florida arguing that the abortion ban is actually against their religious freedom. And so, and that's also an
Yeah.
argument that I've made in an op-ed with a group of interfaith women religious leaders, that abortion rights, the way the Supreme Court decided, has really impeded on our religious right to have an abortion should we choose to have one.
Hmm.
And because in Islam you are allowed to have an abortion, and so so there's um so that's where we're at. And I think we need to really be we actually we really need to fight this hardcore.
Yeah.
It's really yeah, it's really
Yeah.
frightening.
Well, and that's insightful because these kinds of encroachments don't happen the way people think that they would. Like there's not going to be a point where some president or Congress or Supreme Court's going to say this one religion is the official religion of the United States, right? That's not how it's going to happen. They're not going to be an
No,
executive order or
exactly.
a ruling or a law passed. That's not how it's going to go. It's going to happen in other ways where the basis for determinations in the United States become increasingly based on religious teaching. In our training that we do on confronting Christian nationalism, one of the videos that we show is when Jeff Sessions, who was at the time the Attorney General of the United States, was announcing the Trump move to use family separation as the response to refugees coming to the United States, saying, if you come here seeking refugee status, you're going to remain in Mexico and your children are not going to go with you. And so you need to know that's how you're going to be treated. A violation of
Yeah,
international law, human rights, all this stuff. And he started the press conference by saying, I want to begin by commending to you the Apostle Paul and Romans chapter 13, and then quotes the passage and says, laws are from God and obeying the government is what you're required to do. A pastor could stand up and say that, right? That's a religious teaching. You could have it
yeah,
in pastor, a guy in the
yeah,
street. I could say it. You could do it on a podcast,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
But when the Attorney General of the United States says,
yeah,
and therefore the law of the United States shall be thus, because this is what I want to begin with, we have now crossed the Rubicon into another space. And the Trump administration just did this repeatedly
Yeah.
Mike
Yeah.
Pence was doing it, Mike Pompeo as
Yeah.
the Secretary of State, Mike Flynn when he was the National Security Advisors. All the Mikes were doing it. All the other people were doing it as well. Like and then the Supreme Court does its thing. Like
Yeah.
that's how it's going to go. It's not going to be the determination of an official religion.
Yeah.
So
It's the characteristics of a particular religion that's,
wow,
that's being, it translates that way, not
yeah,
in name necessarily, but the characteristics.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so how is this? So in Malaysia,
Yeah.
it's a parliamentary system, right?
Yeah.
And so that's another thing that if people aren't familiar with the different governmental structures, the United States is kind of a one-off in our governmental structure. We vote for representatives. We don't do a parliamentary version of
Yeah.
voting
Yeah.
for a party and seats administered. We kind of talk about it like it's that way. But so anyway, in Malaysia, there's a party that's associated with Christianity. Is that
Yeah,
accurate to
so
say?
there is a lot of okay, Malaysia is it's not like the United States. There's only essentially two party system. In Malaysia, it's a multi-party system. And so in order to form a government, a lot of times you have to form a coalition. And so you have to form a coalition with, various groups in order to have the majority of seats of 222 seats in the parliament. And so the coalition that ended up now being sworn in is the coalition that is very diverse. It has Malays, it has Christians or Chinese, it has different party systems. Now, the different parties represent different agendas,
Hmm.
left of center, center, etc., etc. However, there's one particular party that is DAP, which is non-religious. It's actually made out of
Hmm.
Malays, Chinese, and Indians, and all faiths and non-faiths. So this is now part of the party in Malaysia, the government of Malaysia. So that's the positive part. Now, what is really worrying is that the Malays, which is what I am, Muslim, is 60% of the population. The majority of the Malays have actually voted for the Islamist party.
Okay,
And
say that again.
so,
Say that sentence again because that seems. I want to hear that
yes,
number fresh.
the majority of Muslims, the Malays, have voted for the Islamist party, which is
Wow.
not part of the government right now, but shows you how the Malays have shifted to the right.
Huh.
So that's something that's not in the article. That's something that I, as a Malay, am a bit worried about because yeah, that's going to be a problem down the line.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah, and so this is happening around the globe, right? Like again, in the United States,
yeah,
many of us are very familiar with our context and trying to understand like what happened over the last 7 or 8 years that moves things to the right the way
yeah,
that it did.
yeah,
It's actually
yeah,
been going on around the world, and movements to more authoritarian forms of government have been happening all around the world. There's
yeah.
something more than just internal country politics going on. Do you have any sense about what's up?
It's easy. It's easy to be so black and white. It's reptilian brain. It's easier to hate than to love. It's easier. It's just easier. And I don't, it's really sad how, even in the United States, I mean, you look at the results, okay, the Democrats did well. I mean, considering, but Democrats had to fight tooth and nail against crazy candidates,
Yeah, right, right.
and we won by a few thousand votes. I mean, it's
Yeah,
insane. It shouldn't
right.
be that way. It should be like slam dunk, right?
Yeah, right. You shouldn't
And
have to
that's
spend
not what happened.
$80 million on a Senate race, right? Between, yeah,
Yeah,
over.
and that's not what happened. So, um, We have, and I really blame this on the media and the social media a lot. I think they have a lot to be blamed, and which has fed into the tribalism mentality and the religious, and we co-authored that article I think a year or
Hmm.
two ago about how the Christian evangelicals have really slept with the devils basically, and how they're not
Hmm.
calling out the the Trumps, and how he's using religion for his particular purpose, and how it really Trump is the antithesis of evangelical values, really. And so, how they've compromised on their Christian values just because for political gain. That's what
Hmm.
happened. And
Yeah.
that's what it's all about power, Doug, right? It's about power. And with power comes
Yeah.
money, comes the status quo, yeah, it's all about that. And so I think in order for us to really counter this, for me, it's really about education and about how we address this issue with children. And so that's the reason why I've developed, various forms of, inclusive Islam curriculums for children,
Hmm.
both
Yeah.
here in the United States and in Africa. That's what I've done in the last few years.
Yeah. It's amazing work, by the way. And there's this, I don't know, there's a shift happening. 20 years ago, there was a real movement toward democratization around the world, toward more liberal ideas. Governments all over, there was a thing happening. I don't know, and now I'm thinking 15 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, there was the Arab Spring sort of was coming. Like there were periods of time when all over the world, the kinds of governments and what people were voting for and people that were in power were moving in certain ways that felt
Mhm.
more open and less authoritarian and less
Mhm.
religiously dogmatic.
Yeah.
7 or 8 years ago, that something began to shift. And, we saw it with Brexit in the UK and Trumpism in the United States and authoritarian leaders all over the country, people building walls. Like all of a sudden in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, all over the world, people started building border walls. And
Yeah.
there's something like in 1988, there were 17 border walls and now there's 100 and something. Like these movements, they don't seem, I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's just human nature. It feels like, and I know there's no answer to this. I'm just sort of noting that it's like a tidal, like tidal shifts that are happening. Tides are rising, or
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something afoot, and I'm not assigning any like special magical spiritual stuff to it. I just think there's social movements that I don't know. They seem to move and spread in different times and ways. And we're in one of these periods that seems very scary and authoritarian and dogmatic. And
Yeah, I do think though that there will be another swing, right? And it's the younger generation that are recognizing that it's taking us to the swing towards a more compassionate society.
yeah,
I do believe that, if you look at the statistics in the United States, people don't really, more and more Americans are identifying as being spiritual and not really being affiliated with any particular religion. And I
yeah.
think that's a good thing.
Okay. I used to, Ani, here's the thing. I used to think that was a good thing. And then I've watched a lot of these insurrectionists and heard interviews with them and know people who support those movements. They are those kinds of people as well. In other words, they're not involved in any kind of formal religion, but they're Christian spiritual, and
Mm,
they listen to stuff on the internet and they put it together in their own ways, and they're not a part of a community, and they're not sharing their life, and they're not working
yeah.
together with some people in a local place, or even they're like disparately connected grab bag spirituality,
Mhm.
and they're forming like insurrectionist groups and Jesus
Yeah.
is my savior and Trump is my president spirituality. So I don't know. I guess like maybe it's not the organizers of religion in the United States that are the perpetrators of this stuff solely. It's also just random collections. So I don't know. I'm not trying to be all, downer on the
Yeah.
14th of
Yeah.
December because, in our tradition, you're supposed to be happy this time of year, by the way. It's, it's Advent. Um,
Yeah.
But I don't know. I used to think maybe, the move away from organized religion would free people from the burdens of organized religion. And now I'm like, I don't know. Maybe you guys should go to Catholic churches and listen to the Pope, who's telling you
Yeah,
to be, empathic and caring and think about
that's
the
true
poor.
too.
I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
that's true
just,
too.
but
Yeah.
you have more hope, huh? That there's
I
a
do.
movement afoot.
I have more hope just because yeah, you're on the field, you're on the ground, and
Mhm.
from the work that I do anyway, I see in the Muslim societies, at the end of the day, I think the status quo for Muslims is not working. The
Yeah.
radicalization is not working because they are, all they have is violence around them and violence and oppression, and they are left behind. They
Hmm.
are malnutritioned, and it's just not a it's not a good life for them. So, and a lot of that has come as a result of the insecurities and the lack of peace,
Yeah.
and the lack of peace comes from the lack of compassion, right? And so, at the end of the day, at the heart of it is compassion, love and
Yeah.
compassion. And love and compassion for each other, regardless of who the other is, and I think that's a process that individuals
Hmm.
have to go through. Their transformative spiritual transformation, and the work that we do is to help them take them through that transformation.
Yep.
So I get all kinds of emails from people, but like this morning today, I get this email from a total stranger saying, he's a truck driver, and his boss is asking him to transport alcohol, and according to his understanding of Islam, he's not allowed to
Mhm.
do that. And I'm saying, and my response is going to be, well, actually, it doesn't say that in the Quran. You're not prohibited from transporting
Wow.
alcohol. You're not getting drunk on it, whether alcohol or drugs, prescribed or not. Um, what is important according to the Quran is that you provide for your family, period. And so, if driving a truck is how you provide for your family, then that's the most important part.
Mhm.
That's your duty. So, that's so people take religion in such
Yeah,
a
yeah,
literal and unproductive and you know
right.
um, destructive way, really. So
Yeah, well, you're onto something, and, in most experiences, when I've done it and when I've watched other people, get sort of a fundamentalist about certain passages, it's often not the "love your neighbor and bless those who harm you" that they take literally, right? It's almost like all that stuff, compassion and do to others as you'd have them do to you, and care about the blessing of others and not just the blessing to yourself. That somehow becomes figurative, but
yeah.
some other, teaching becomes kind of literalist. And I often say to my literalist friends, I'm like, well, if you'd take all of it literally, maybe you'd end up in a different place than if you only get to, take
Oh,
the.
totally, right.
Yeah, it's
Completely.
if you take love one another and serve God and care for your fellow human being literally, that would be pretty good.
Yeah,
So you sort of wonder sometimes if it's about literalism or just like, why are you choosing those passages? And true with the Quran as well.
yeah,
But most people in my world, they don't actually know the Bible stuff. They know the teachings about it,
yeah.
much more than they know it itself, and so they've been left without a lot of options and
Well,
choices. Is that
similarly,
true
right?
with yeah,
Yeah, yes, because people are just too lazy, right?
yeah,
So they're
yeah,
too lazy to read and study for themselves. And so, let me just turn on a lecture on YouTube and see and gather my education that way. And that's why, we've really ramped up our social media presence with
yeah,
really debunking a lot of the traditional interpretations of Islam when it comes to apostasy and blasphemy. What is the root word that has really, because if you look at what's going on, for example, in Nigeria, this young woman was killed because she
hmm,
said something, and it was basically a mob that basically attacked her and killed
yeah,
her, a Muslim mob, because they felt that she was blaspheming Islam. But even if she was, there is no reason to kill her, because Prophet Muhammad never killed anyone for, for
right,
disrespecting or insulting or trying to kill him even, right?
yeah,
So this it's so twisted right now, and so the best that we can do is to keep pumping out these counter narratives and re-educating Muslims about these really fundamental bastardizations of
Hmm.
Islam and how we've been raised on a lot of these this misinterpretation, and all these misinterpretation are done intentionally
Yeah.
to assert a certain control over the Muslim population, right? And so
Mm.
it's not done to liberate. It's not done out of love and compassion.
Interesting.
Because if it's done out of love and compassion, we would not have the turmoil that we have in Muslim societies. We wouldn't. We
Mm.
just wouldn't. Yeah. And so that when you look at all the evidence and you go to
Right.
the root of the evidence, and it's so clear what the evidence is, and that is how Islam is being preached and taught in Islamic schools, and so that needs to change. And so, I'm happy to say I'm positive because I'm happy to say that the work that we've been doing has just been, scaling up and scaling up,
Yeah.
and to the point where it's catching on, even with traditional institutions are seeking our input
Mm.
in the example of the work that we do. So, for example, there is the equivalent of the Pope, I suppose, is an Islamic institution called Al Azhar, which is Sunni, out of Cairo. It's the oldest functioning university, and um, and um, and so they have this publication that they solicited, and it's called Islam in Practice. And
Mm.
I submitted, our Islam in Practice, and where we work with religious leaders, male religious leaders, and how they advocate for Muslim women and girls' rights every Friday, in their preaching, and how
Mm.
that has impacted society over the 7 years that we've been implementing this program. And you see the shift in society. So even within 5 to 7 years, you can actually have a cultural influence, a positive cultural
Yeah.
influence, right? If you uh, if that's how you preach. And so there's the preaching of hate, and there's the preaching of love and compassion. And so what we've seen is that in the communities that we work in, people are preferring the preaching of love and compassion, and so they've been coming to our mosques rather than their
Hmm.
local mosque. So that says a lot.
It sure
um,
does.
and so this particular paper that I presented, that's going to be published next year. So by a very, very traditional and conservative Muslim institution. So that's why I'm hopeful, because people are realizing that what they teach at these institutions has had a negative impact in society. And a lot of Muslims are now claiming to be progressive.
Yeah. Good.
15 years ago, that word was taboo, was offensive, was an insult. Now, people claiming to be progressive Muslims. So
Yeah.
I'm
There's
happy
this.
about that
There's this.
transformation.
There's an old adage I know from the organizing world that says, first, when you're first on the scene, people ignore you, then they
Yeah,
laugh at you, then they
yeah,
fear you, then they accept you. Like there's this
yeah.
way that it kind of goes and kind of happens, and you're seeing it.
There's also
And
a phase that they fight you, and
yeah.
so what happened. Oh, what I wanted to share with you is that when they were fighting me, the Malaysian government, they were basically not this 2 prime ministers ago, who's now in jail, actually, I'm happy to say, because he's so corrupt. But under his administration, he basically funded a website, a whole social media campaign against all progressive and feminist and
Mm.
LGBT Muslims. And his mantra was progressive feminists and LGBT Muslims are more dangerous than ISIS. So that's how much fear we've
Yes.
instilled in them by the work that we do and in promoting love and compassion for all.
That's so good. And it's true on the Christian side too. And I hear the same thing from Jewish progressive leaders. Like there's that it is around. And I get your point that most people don't want to, can't, won't investigate their own spiritual teaching and in scriptural interpretations on their own, with the Quran, with the Jewish text, with the Christian gospels and writings. They won't. So they're going to wait for somebody else. And curiously, if you go on YouTube or you go on the internet anywhere and
Mm.
you look up like progressive Christianity, 80% of what you're going to see is people saying negative things about it. If you just say, what does the Bible say about, put in a topic, 99% of the things you're going to see there are coming from conservatives and fundamentalists and things that I feel like are closer to hate mongering. I'm sure the
Mm.
same is true with the Quran. What does the Quran teach about alcohol
Mhm.
or something is probably not what you are going to tell that truck driver. And
Yeah.
so I don't know. Yes, it's true that people don't want to do it on their own. They won't. But it's also true that those of us who have progressive thoughts about all these ideas have far less content out there in the world. You're doing great work. We're doing what we can, but it's a
Yeah.
teeny amount, isn't it, compared to
Yeah.
all the rest that is
Yeah.
out there. So someone can just go on YouTube and get in a string of listening to things and watching things that just
Right.
send them down a
That
road
rabbit
of
hole.
conservatism, and
Yeah.
you rarely fall into down a rabbit hole of progressivism and compassion
Yeah.
and love and kindness, right? Like
Well,
that.
that's the thing. I think the social media, YouTube and whatnot, can do a really good service to humanity if they would, instead of, putting stringing along, the same sort of messaging into that
Yeah,
rabbit hole. Also here, randomly, pop up different alternative points of view. And I mean, that in itself would really help. But in order for us to do that, we actually have to pay, right? You have to pay YouTube to do that. You have to pay Facebook to do that.
that's right.
And it's just despicable on their part, as far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned. Um, and I think that's something that I think we as progressives can do, is to maybe mobilize, strategize, and mobilize. And how do we get our messaging out and meet with these people? Like, this is their responsibility. They can't keep, trying to charge us for that. I mean, we used to on Facebook when we first started out, 50, like I think we registered with Facebook about 10 years ago. When we did a post, our posts would reach 15,000, 25,000
yeah,
easily, right? Now, 500, 700,
yeah,
if we're
yeah. It's
if we're
too. Yep,
lucky.
yep.
But the thing is, we have 12,000 subscribers, and even our own 12,000 subscribers are
Don't see
not
it.
seeing our posts,
Yes.
right?
Yep. Yep.
So, and then they have the audacity to message and say, "Oh, get your posts more visible by advertising." I'm like,
Sponsor and boost your post. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I hear you. It's true. And conservatives on all sides go ahead and do that.
they
They
have a
boost
lot more
them, they
money.
pay them, they're producing it, they're generating stuff. It's an incredible amount of stuff
Yeah,
being produced. I mean, if you just think about all the conservative outlets, we could start naming them, right?
yeah,
OAN and Fox News and
yeah,
One America, and like just go on and on. And then you're like,
yeah,
and the progressives on the other side, and then not even taking in talk radio and all that. And then there's like, okay, well, there's NPR,
yeah,
maybe there's MSNBC,
yeah,
uh, there's maybe the New York Times. Now you get into journalism,
yeah,
right? And it's just
yeah.
all journalists, and you're like, I don't know. There's something that well,
So
we have to make
it's
sure there's enough content out there as well. I guess is what I'm
yeah, and so
bantering on about.
the thing that conservatives are really good at is that they're really good at dumbing it down.
Yep,
And so that's what we've been doing, is we've basically taken stuff for the last 10 years or so. That's what we've been doing, just dumbing it
yep,
down. That's it.
yep, yep. Third grade reading level stuff. Yeah,
Yep,
because
that's right.
and because that actually works for me too. Like I don't know what my reading level is. It's above ninth grade. I think I have a master's degree, so maybe
Sure.
I could be at 12th grade reading level. I don't know how that works, but the messages that are like produced at a third grade reading level and are kind of
Yeah,
interesting, and a TikTok video and a Snapchat,
yeah,
like that stuff's just a little more interesting. And
yeah,
it's easy for a lot of us progressive types to feel like we're above all that. We're not gonna.
yeah. Yeah, that's the
But what's
thing. The
funny is
progressives try to,
if you listen to conservatives talk on their
yeah,
stuff, they're saying
yeah,
just the opposite. They're saying, "Oh, the liberals are running the game. The liberals are doing this. They're controlling all of it. The media is controlling it all."
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's funny that that's the same narrative over there. But I think they protest too much. I think they're.
Yeah.
Well, Ani, thank you as always for all of your good work. Hope people go to Muslims for Progressive Values .org and .com, right? You can get there both ways. Anyway,
no, just .org. That's
.org.
it.
Google Muslims for Progressive Values. It'll get you into all the spaces for all of those things. And if you didn't even know there was such an organization as Muslims for Progressive Values, there is, and it's doing work all over the
And
world
it's
and really great.
growing. And
And
there's
if
a
you
lot of
want,
us out there. Yeah.
and you should help fund it and make it possible because it needs to
Thank
exist
you.
in the world, and it's a really good thing. So, Ani, thank you so much, and thanks for taking time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doug. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.